Hey everybody, I wanted to apologize again for not being able to be there on Thursday. I was pretty sick, so I did promise that I'd make a quick overview of egoism so that we could just kind of start with the next section. But what I want to do when we come into class Tuesday is actually begin with the discussion of your own examples of egoism in your life, or examples of relativism, or the death of God. So I want it to primarily be a discussion day, and then I'll throw in things about the next section as we talk. But it's time for us to have more discussion and less me narrating to y'all about everything. First of all, I did want to point out this really funny cartoon from our book. This is I referred to it as the altruism of capitalism. And basically it's a corporate executive who's telling the artist to make a painting that depicts how the chairman and board presiding over the twin spirits of art and industry as they rise from the waters of diligence to reap the rich harvest of prosperity, while three muses of faith, hope, and charity, flanked by enterprise and initiative, bless the corporation and encourage the shareholders. I think that's pretty funny myself. That's kind of the way everything works. One of the issues with egoism, let's remember that we are in an ethical climate of hyper-individualism. That's a very major component of contemporary 21st century America, is a sort of hyping up of the individual and individualism, and critiques of relativism, oddly enough, and of the death of God. Both they both kind of fall on the side of what we need are more real individuals in this society, and then we wouldn't have to worry about that. The moral environment, what this ends up meaning a lot of times when you go into individualism, that is, that everything boils down to the individual and the success of the individual, and the rest don't matter, is a moral environment of me or them. So the challenge and focus is egoism, definition that all decisions reduce down to what benefits me. Even an act that appears purely selfless may have had a very selfish motivation, right? They give a few different examples, and we'll talk about those, at least one of those down there and another one that I have. The opposite of egoism is altruism, from Latin alter, meaning other, like alternative, other, or that decisions reduce down to minimizing harm of others and sometimes even sacrifice for the good of others, right? So one interesting example that a lot of us might have experienced either ourselves or through family members or friends, is a person who joins up with the armed forces is doing so out of altruistic motives, otherizing motives to protect the nation, or egoistic motives to get the benefits that come with signing up. Also to get the benefits that come with being recognized as a veteran by some people in our society. The issue here is, doesn't matter whether the person signs up for altruistic reasons or the person signs up for egoistic reasons. Also, are these two things mutually exclusive? Can a person not want to serve the nation while also getting the benefits offered for doing that? That's a kind of a question of egoism, actually. There's some people, if you go down to the next example, there are the parents who care for their kids. Do they do so out of fear of their spouse's wrath? This is the example, although I've kind of made it more gender non-binary, this is the example from one of the examples from the book, right? Does the parent care for the child out of fear of their spouse's wrath if they don't show the appropriate amount of care? Out of anxiety over social society judging them for being bad parents? I think we often hear when a child does something embarrassing that embarrasses the family, that they're embarrassed for the child, for themselves, right? They don't want to look bad in the eyes of neighbors. And I think that in one sense, it's not just when the child does something, it's that the parents themselves want to be seen in the eyes of society as doing the right thing. And then also, it's quite obvious in our society a lot of times that children, especially among corporate leaders and political leaders, are almost part of the dressing or part of the scenery that's necessary to succeed. So, what we're actually asking here is, does a parent actually care for the kid for the sake of the kid? Is that really what's going on? Or is it that the parent doesn't wants to do the right, what appears to be the right thing, right? In order to avoid the wrath of their spouse, the judgment of their neighbors, or in order to achieve a certain kind of financial and or political goal. Those are all reasons that you might find that a parent is actually being a good, quote unquote, good parent, not because they are being unselfish, but because they have very selfish reasons for wanting to make sure that their child grows up to be a certain way, that nobody sees them as being deadbeat parents, or that that they are the model family. So, in other words, the idea of the unconditional love of the parent should always actually be something that we question, for the simple reason unconditional love would mean the ability to love without any conditions whatsoever. But usually parents, when we talk about parents and their unconditional love, it meets one condition. It's the child that they have either given birth to or adopted, the child that's an extension of them, right? So that's not really unconditional, right? Now, it very well may be, as time goes by and you observe the behavior of the parents, some of these things might have been the reason why the parents started caring for their children. But as the author, Blackburn, of our text says, it could be as time goes by and you keep observing their behavior and you keep talking to them, you begin to realize that what once have started out for egoistic reasons has now really become the love of the child, care for the child, the success of the child for themselves, right? Now we get to a fancy word called hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is, in both of these examples, required that we interpret, and hermeneutics is the fancy Greek word for interpretation. The fancy word hermeneutics based on the notion of interpreting the messages of the gods. Hermes was their messenger, so the technique is named after Hermes. So hermeneutics. We have to listen to what people say as well as watch what they do, right? And as we do this, we're making interpretations, we're making judgments and critiques, right? When we gather enough evidence about another person, we can have a judgment call, and then we'll act from that interpretation, right? So if you see a soldier who's being lauded for their patriotism, but in talking to that person, that they don't care anything about anybody else in the world, they just did it for the benefits they could get and for the social standing. Or when you see a parent who is being lauded for being a good parent, but from your watching them and you're you're talking to them, that they're really only doing this so they don't look bad, right? So these sort of judgments, these sort of things are interpretations that come from evidence that you're able to collect. The problem that we have, and that's why Blackburn points out that over time, you may actually end up in a situation where observing the parent originally showed you they were egoistical, but as time went by, they literally came to love and care and want the best for their child, for their child's sake, not for primarily egoistical reasons. So this is the reason why these interpretations are never finished. These interpretations are always up for further data collection, further thinking. This is what makes this philosophical exercise a little more scientific, right? Science is never done. It's always gaining more insights. Even after it establishes laws and theories, it's gaining more insights that help to understand that. And it's kind of the same thing when you're dealing with people, because when you're dealing with other human beings, you're literally dealing with people who you'll never never be 100% accurate about with your interpretation. And this is all really based off of, more than anything else, the problem with interpreting others' actions being closed off from us being closed off from that these other people's thinking, right? Unless they share it, and even when someone shares what they're thinking about, why they're doing what they're doing, they don't necessarily tell the truth, right? So again, everything is always no interpretation we come up with about a person is 100% accurate. And as time goes by, we have to be open to changing and evolving our interpretations. So sometimes people start off as people we think are, real good people, and as time goes by, we begin to realize, whoa, that's not right. And then the other way too, right? All right. And one of the problems that we have then about this interpretation is that some people will come up with an interpretation, say Sigmund Freud or Carl Jung, some of the psychiatrists and psychologists, or maybe some of the things I've heard Jordan Peterson say, or some of the things that I've read in the thinking of a few other self-help people. They come up with an interpretation of human beings and human nature, and then they make everything fit that interpretation, right? So you've got to be very careful there with that, right? So this is just as important of a concern. Once you generate a theory of human behavior from these hermeneutics, from these factical interpretations, those theories can become so closed off that they don't admit for change, right? And this is also the reason why some of the theories, the ancient theories of the human person, were all based around character. Remember that ethics is actually derived from ethos, which is the Greek word for character. So the ethos of a person, the ethos of a situation, it's the character of the situation. A lot of times what ends up happening in the ancient world, and still today actually, is we say that a person is their character by fate, right? They're born with a certain kind of character, and that character will always predetermine what they do and how they do, so that there's no ability for freedom. Quite a few of the ancient notions in the Greco-Roman world, this was paired off into and became part of the interpretation of the early medieval Christian world, that we're all fallen and therefore we'll always fall, and that's what we do, and except for the grace of God, there's no hope, right? These kinds of thinking gets taken over, right? So even, you could talk about the Freudian notion of libido and how that becomes over-determinative for trying to understand who a person is. And you also have the Nazi interpretation that there are some people who are this way and some people who are that way, and that we have to get rid of the ones that are the other way and keep the ones that are the good way. This is the kind of thing that some of these theories, when the interpretation becomes theorized to the point of being a closed system of determining, who's good and who's bad, it doesn't allow for you to actually be free. Okay. I have here a link in the notes to something out of Plato, which I recommend that you take a look at, the myth of Gyges. And it primarily, what it does is it's Plato's attempt to show that when a person can hide all of their motives and get away with their hidden motives, they'll probably do some pretty heinous things. And basically it's to say that one of the things that keeps people at a certain level of ethics or moral integrity is it's about us and everybody else, and so people are watching. But in this instance, Plato puts forward an opportunity where a person's able to become invisible. And what this really is talking about is if a person was able to go completely unseen, they might get up to all kinds of things. This is an abuse of power, right? Absolute power, abuses absolutely, right? Or what is it? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So a person who's able to become invisible, you can't see who they are, what they're doing, how they're manipulating things. Well, once you actually kind of take that into consideration, now pull back from the metaphor after you watch it and think about how what this really is talking about is the fact that the things that people think and the reasons that people have for what they do are never fully exposed to us. The majority, we're always, all of us, a little invisible to each other, right? And this is the reason why it's such a big deal, I think, for human beings, this whole notion of promises and truthfulness and swearing and agreeing to not lie or to admit anything that's important. It's very important to us because we don't communicate telepathically. We communicate through words, and neither our behavior nor our words are fully representational of all the reasons we have for why we make decisions, and or for all the things that we do. So another thing that Blackburn points out here is the way that the notion of self-interest is abused in most of our common speech, right? So when, say, Pope Francis gives a lot of attention to a poor person who's sick and helps them through the hospital and does all these kind of good things for them, there's some people who would say, of course, out of self-interest, the Pope wants to look like a saint, right? Or there are a lot of other kinds of examples, but basically what happens is that when you say that a person is only acting out of self-interest, that's a hard claim to maintain and prove. It's also the case that the fact that a person has some interest in benefiting doesn't necessarily negate the fact that they also want to help other people, right? I actually know that the reason that I want to help as many people in our society as possible is because it will also help me. Like, if we help each other, it helps all of us, right? When you get caught up in hyper-individualism, everything becomes about self-interest, and you don't want to help anybody other than those who you actually see are directly benefiting you. Whereas when you think in terms of the whole of a society, if the society is sick, mostly sick, the society is mostly impoverished, the society is mostly suffering, how is it that everybody in the society in some way isn't suffering, isn't sick, right? It's a problem when you do this watch out, they will act out of self-interest thing. It, first of all, doesn't tell me anything, right? So if you're saying that everybody acts out of self-interest, you're saying there's no such thing as ethics. If you're saying that watch, see, here's what I'm going to tell you, they're going to act out of self-interest. And the issue here that Blackburn points out that makes this logically and critically unacceptable is that I have to wait for the behavior and then I determine it's self-interested after I see it. Whereas a truly predictive model would be able to predict that a person will act or not act out of self-interest before it happens, and then the confirmation will be the behavior. Rather than, I see what it is, watch, he's going to ask by self-interest, and then you turn around and then you categorize all of the actions in the light of self-interest. There's no prediction to it. It's just a basic claim, an assertion, and then you make the assertion fit. Okay? All right, so that's all I wanted to say about egoism. So if y'all could watch this and kind of have an idea, and then when we come in on Tuesday, the 14th, Valentine's Day, I will be happy to be leading a class-wide discussion, hopefully, with lots of people getting involved on examples of egoism, but also, any examples you might want to bring up of relativism or the death of God, or, any of these challenges if you've read ahead. Okay? All right. See y'all tomorrow.